Oh, I can't see when we're live. Tell me when we're live. Oh, we're live. Here we are. All right. Well, how exciting. I think we're live. So let's get on with it. Welcome, everybody. I imagine people will start joining us. So I will just introduce us and let's start chatting. My name is Anna Valdinger, and I'm delighted to welcome everybody to this extremely fun chat with the wonderful Meredith Jaffé. I'll just tell you a little bit about Meredith. She has written novels for adults and children. Her journalism has been published widely in places such as Mamma Mia, The Hoopla, The Guardian, The Huffington Post. She's also the director of Storyfest, which is a brilliant storytelling festival held on the New South Wales coast, down the south coast. And she regularly chairs panels, interviews writers, and runs workshops. The Dressmakers of Yarrandarrah Prison is her third adult novel, and it's available in all good bookshops and online now. I'm so proud of it. I'm so delighted by it. It is just a whole bundle of charm and warmth and thought-provoking storytelling with characters to fall in love with. I'll just do a little bit about the book, and then I'm dying to hear from you, Meredith, about where it came from and everything about it. So we open with Derek. He's an accountant who's in prison for embezzling funds from the golf club. And he gets an unexpected visit from his ex-sister-in-law with some news. His daughter, Debbie, is getting married. But he hasn't spoken to Debbie in years, and obviously he can't be there in person. He's in prison. So eventually, with the aid of the Backtackers sewing group, he decides his grand gesture of love will be to make her a wedding dress. And as we get to know Derek, his fellow stitchers, and the other inmates of Yarrandarrah Prison, we get a warm, witty, and really rather heartbreaking insight into life behind bars and the different ways people can find hope in the darkness. As I say, I absolutely loved this. And you know, Meredith, that you've made me cry multiple times with this book. Can you tell us a bit about where it came from and how you met Derek in your head?
Yeah, and I'm really thrilled that I've made you cry, and I hope I make everyone, at least get a lump in the throat when they get to the end of the book. So back in the day when I worked at the Hoopla as the editor of the bookshelf, I used to interview a lot of writers for that as well, and one of those writers happened to be Esther Freud, about her new book at the time, which was Mr. Mac and Me. And when I'm researching, I sort of dive into Google and go down all the various rabbit holes, etc., and find out as much as I can about a person. And she wrote a series of articles, actually, but she was writing about a group called Fine Cell Work. And Fine Cell Work is a British, they call themselves a social enterprise now, but they're a British charity. And they go into British prisons, predominantly male, because most prisoners are male, and teach these men fine needlework skills. So we're talking not just tapestry or cross stitch, petty point, and quilting as well. And this work is paid for, and they pay the men to make these pieces, and it teaches them not only a skill that they can use on the outside, but also provides a tool for them to manage their mental health as well in this environment. So I'm reading this article that Esther's writing about, explaining all of this, and there's these gorgeous images illustrating that with beautiful cushions and throws, etc. And my first thought when I read this article was, what if you were one of these guys in prison and you decided to make your daughter's wedding dress? Absolutely nothing to do with the work that I know, like why? Nothing that Fine Cell Work does is remotely related to dresses. So I should spell that out even now, all these years later. And the idea was there, and I went off to my husband and went, I've got the best idea for a new book. And he was like, oh yeah. And I told him, he went, that's a really stupid idea. And I was like, why? What? He went, how are a bunch of guys in prison going to make a wedding dress? And I guess because of that, sometimes you need that friction to rub against.
That's the challenge.
Because of that, that I was like, I'll show you. So,
exactly.
So that's kind of where it came from. And Derek, I just immediately imagined a very plain, almost mousy kind of guy who, that was trying to keep a really low profile in a place that, as we all imagine, and some know, that is, volatile, if not always violent. And I wanted to make him sort of the antithesis, I guess an anti-hero of the story, a bit of a knob, really, is our Derek. And hence his name, Derek Clive Brown. He doesn't have a very exciting name either. And, and he just came to me as well.
Yeah, he's quite gentle, but he's also, I find him quite interesting because he does have an emotional arc. He has some stuff that he has to come to terms with. He starts off a little defensive. He doesn't see himself quite the same as the other guys in the prison. And I found that a really interesting journey, how he has found the backtackers group so useful as a sort of way to occupy himself. But actually, it's only the wedding dress project that really starts the bonding, the more personal bonding of the men in the group, and how that connection really starts to form there. And I think that idea of connection, it seems to be just woven throughout the book, through the stitching, through the wedding dress, through the families, but also through reading. Which I found really interesting, because reading can be such a solitary thing, and yet it does bring us so much together. And there's a great strand in there about the library. So I wonder if you would talk a bit about how the two strands, both the reading and the stitching, ways for you to explore that idea of connection and mental health and the other things you wanted to play with.
And I think that you're right. And the reason I wanted to explore connection also came about through another random moment. I was probably supposed to be doing something useful, and I was, scrolling through Facebook, and I came across a TEDx talk by Johann Hari, who wrote Chasing the Screen. And the talk is really worth watching if you're interested in the subject. It's on addiction. And he puts forward the premise that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but connection. And the book explores this through a whole range of ways. So we're not just talking about drug addiction. We're not just talking about alcoholism. We're talking about shopping. We're talking about all sorts of ways that we build habits, or we build lifestyles around things that are not necessarily in our best interest, to avoid dealing with the bigger questions in our lives. And so the sewing group, in fact, Jane, the sewing teacher in the book, is desperately trying to get the men to be more cohesive as a unit. It's all very well. So the backtackers, as they're called, turn up to their sewing group on a Thursday afternoon, and they spend 3 hours with Jane learning new techniques, or just helping each other with their stitching and having a chat. There's rules around it. You can't use no jail talk when you're in backtackers, and it's one of the few places the men are called by their actual names and not their number or their surname type thing. So it's
really humanizing.
It's supposed to, and it's supposed to engender, camaraderie, but it hasn't necessarily been as effective as Jane would hope. And hence that strand with the wedding dressmaking is something that pulls them all together as a group project, which is her heart's desire and her great motivation for encouraging the project. At the same time, we've got a character called the Doc, who is a multiple murderer, and he's also the prisoner librarian. And the Doc is an educated man, obviously. His name's the Doc, and he's not a very nice person, I'll be honest, but despite this, he does some great stuff. So he has in the library, the men can go there for respite, yet again from the jail talk. The people who are doing the literacy scheme get an extra half day in the library, access to the library. You've got people who are researching their appeals. You've got people who just want to sit and read the sports pages in the papers. And you've got the people who need help with writing letters home to a loved one or to their lawyers, because they're functionally or are illiterate. And that's something I really wanted to talk about in the novel. And then he's also started a journal writing course, which is his sort of nod to helping people with their mental health. And he runs the book club as well. So he is in a way the go-between for a lot of prisoners between their life inside and life outside, because he's facilitating, what magazines come in for them. They can order a book from the local town library if they particularly want to read it. And, he helps them with their Open University textbooks and things like this. So that connection is a very different kind of connection. And a really small example, it's only a couple of sentences in the book, but such a powerful tool, and this happens for real, is that prisoners will often read the same story as their child or their loved one on the outside at the same time. So, let's pick, Ranger's Apprentice or Harry Potter, and they'll both be reading, book 6 together. And then when they have their weekly phone calls, and you can imagine, especially talking to teenagers, when you go, how was school today? What's going on?
There's nothing.
And so the book and that allows them, and also like their lives are so completely different to each other's at that point in time that having a novel to talk about gives them that connection, doesn't it? That they can actually
gives
have
you some common ground.
I love this character, I hate that character. Yeah, there's that element to it as well.
And
so,
something safe to talk about as well. Something that's not sort of fraught with, the realities, I guess, of what life might be like in prison.
And a lot of kids whose parents or have a parent who is in prison often struggle at school themselves with not only, because they're coming from a particular kind of background potentially, but also getting bullied and picked on at school because, your dad's in prison for something, or, your dad's a loser because he got caught, or, all the kind of stuff that can happen for kids. So it's really important for these to try and maintain some sort of connection with their previous or their outside life. So I was just really interested in how the microcosm of the C wing, because it's only set in one small part of an entire prison, just allowed me within that, by constraining the characters into the space, actually allowed me to kind of to provide a really big picture of the world as they see it.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. And then also, Derek, for example, has had no contact particularly with the outside world. He has become incredibly insular. And actually, it's this project that allows him to start looking outward a bit. When his sister-in-law turns up to visit, he hasn't spoken to his ex-wife or his daughter in years. And it's actually that's the sort of catalyst for him to, apart from obviously he's been speaking to his father, but that's about it. He's had a very limited scope, I guess, and it allows him to sort of look outwards a little bit more again, which is so charming.
And I think it helps him start to deal with the unspoken issues that they're pretty obvious to anyone else, reader or characters alike. But Derek, he's buried them so effectively that he needs a shove to actually deal with his personal issues.
Well, and I think it's very true that it's easy for us all to see what's wrong with other people, and it's not so easy for us to confront what might be up with ourselves. And the theme of addiction, I think, is really a fascinating one, because Derek would deny that he had any addiction issues that might have led to his embezzling money from the golf club, but there's that sort of really interesting pressure cooker that you get a sense of what his life was like beforehand, that his wife, Lorraine, the most glorious character, what a creation, but
a lot of fun to write, I might add as well. Anna.
She's wonderfully extreme, but she does feel very authentic. She could tip into caricature, but actually walk that line very cleverly, where she's a villain, but she's an understandable person. She's got her own addiction, with shopping and so on, and how that all then feeds into creating this sort of tragic situation, really, where a family is ruptured and broken apart and then stitched back together, hopefully. And was it also the idea of justice? There's a lot to do with, rehabilitation or redemption, or, how you can actually kind of come to terms with where you've been and what you've done. And it's not just through Derek, it's through some of the other men in the Stitches group, for example, Joey, who's an absolutely gorgeous character who I completely adore, who is in there for some some pretty real crimes, but at the same time you feel like there's this wonderful potential there. Can you tell us a bit about Joey and the other Stitches and where they came from?
And I think one of the things that I did when I discovered Find Cell Work, and anyone who's interested should certainly dive onto their website, but they have a section which is a blog, and they have a lot of a lot of sort of pieces that are written by the volunteers who go into the prison, but also a lot of letters from the men themselves talking about what fine cell work has done for them and how it's changed their lives. And that was also a really big driving force for me in writing this novel, as I was really interested in the questions around there, but for the grace of God go I. A lot of people are not in prison for horrendous crimes. They can be in prison for crimes that I can imagine it would be easy enough to have made that mistake, or to have had that brain snap, or to have, you know, when you think about murder, for instance, they're mostly crimes of passion. It's not people, you know, walking around just suddenly randomly shooting people. And that's why we find those kinds of incidents so terrifying, is because there is no reason. It's not like you've been, you know, you've had a terrible relationship with someone for a long time type scenario. So I was really interested in trying to create a cast of characters that weren't necessarily weren't bad people in the sense that they had, you know, particularly the doc, you know, he's a multiple murderer, but there's men in there who have you know, who have done massive, you know, big bank heists, or have done, you know, drug running, who you know, which I would argue is a far more insidious and nasty crime than necessarily just, you know, just stealing from someone. And so with Joey, and I deliberately wanted to leave his crime not as an afterthought, but I wanted him to be judged for who he was as a person. So that when you found out what he'd actually done, that you had some more empathy for his situation and how he might have ended up the way that he was. And as you know, through story, you can tell a lot of truths, but without being didactic as well. So it was really, it was a real case of show, don't tell, in terms of trying to create really three-dimensional characters that would engender your empathy as a reader, and that would hopefully make you reflect on what is it that sends someone to prison. It's not a very big population when you think about it. Out of a country the size of Australia, 46,000 people are in prison at any given point in time. 93% of those are male. So there was also that element of, well, what do you do to stop someone coming back into the system? What sort of things do you need to change? And there's a lot of conversations around this among prison reform activists and social activists. And I do have a sociology major as well. So I kind of have always been really interested in group human behaviour rather than necessarily the individual psychology. So rehabilitation was like, well, okay, so you've got a carrot and a stick system within a prison to try and encourage the men predominantly into a path of, you know, rehabilitation or self-correction, addressing your issues. And that's everything from literacy to mental health, physical health. There's a whole range of tools that are available. Not enough perhaps on the, you know, there is no fine cell work in Australia, sadly. But there is art, you know, so there are some art classes, and there are people who are obviously engaged in meaningful work in the system as well. But yet we still have a scenario where so many people end up back in. So I was just kind of, I guess, exploring that for myself. As you know, with writers, so often the book comes out of our desire to rub away at a problem until we kind of think we understand it. And having said that, you understand it through a particular prism. You don't necessarily understand the whole problem, because life is far more complicated than that. And we like books and movies to be able to kind of simplify things a little bit for us, and so we can kind of just focus on one thing. So I guess in that sense, that's what I've tried to do. So Joey is a character he's an Indigenous guy. He's been moved to Yarrandarrah Prison for the last bit of his sentence before he's due for parole. And he joins the stitching group, and he is our token, if you like, our token excellent stitcher. So he's the one guy in the entire group who does know how to make a dress, and as he likes to say, I'm a dab hand with a bedazzler. He's an absolute larrikin. He is totally adorable. He's a very young guy too. He's only like about 23. and he's as smart as a whip, but in that sort of real street smart, cunning kind of way, rather than
not necessarily educated.
No, he admits himself that school just didn't work for him. He liked sport and art, and that was about it. So we see through his relationship with the doc, and this also allows us to see the doc through a different prism, is we see how Joey's arc is about, you know, him taking the opportunities to learn how to read. Because once he realises that if he can read, he can get into his costume design course that he could do when he leaves, that suddenly changes his attitude towards everything that he's doing. And then, and like one of the things Fine Selwyn do in the UK, which I love, is they have an outreach program. So when prisoners leave, finish their sentences, they can actually go and work for Fine Cell Work as apprentices and continue to learn their skills, continue to get educated. And they just last week won a massive award in the UK, which will allow them to run other sorts of courses with the men, like how to write a resume, how to conduct and how to behave in a job interview and prepare for a job interview and all this kind of stuff. So I just think that the whole range of what Lady Anne Tree set up, you know, it's not just about having lovely cushions in the top shops, you know, that it is actually about providing a different pathway for people. And that's really what I really wanted to talk about.
Well, and I think you've done that incredibly well. And as you say, it's about when we meet these characters and we have empathy for them and we see them as people and not just crimes, then you're invested so much in kind of how they are going to go as individuals, you know, and finding a way for them to have some hope and some light at the end of their tunnels, you know, so that it's not just about kind of punishment and kind of sitting there and, you know, thinking about what you did, you know, in the sort of punitive kind of way, but actually you see when the threat of the library being closed becomes, you know, looms large for these characters, the helplessness and the hopelessness, the powerlessness of being banged up, I think is really vividly wrought, you know, and that obviously it kicks off a whole sequence of events, and I won't spoil because I want people to enjoy reading it, but it's visceral, the feeling of something so important being taken away, you know, and that powerlessness, I think, is so heartbreaking in so many ways, you know.
And that also came from a real life. Yeah, it also came from a real life inspiration with what was happening once again in the UK with all the closures of the libraries across the UK council system, at the local government level. And there was a kerfuffle within the British government when they made changes to the incentive and privileges scheme, and as a byproduct of that, actually banned books in prisons, and the uproar was enormous, as you can imagine, because you were only allowed to buy books from preferred suppliers, which is fine if you can afford to buy a book. You know, there was all this sort of knock on. And so I sort of took the idea of that but made it about a library. And I live in a small country town. We almost lost our local library, and you know, people rallied, people came out, people was like, you can't take that away from us. And I think it's also that, you know, we live in this time of economic rationalism, and libraries, the value of a library to a community is not economic. And you can't judge it through an economic framework. It's just completely stupid. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with the prison, because imagine if, you know, as happens, you know, the library service is cut off, what the ripple effect of something like that can be. And it also goes
to monetize mental health, you know, and cultural health, and, you know, that sort of.
And it also goes to the whole argument, and there is always a tension, and it changes when our political masters change as well, is that real tension between, do you go to prison to be punished for your crime, or do you go to prison as punishment for the crime? So, you know, like it's like compounding the punishment if you then cut them off even further from any connection with the outside world. And as we all know as readers, we can travel the world from our lounge chair. We don't need to actually get off our bum to go and, go to Italy for a summer, or go into, go overseas, go back in time, go forward in time. It's just a wonderful gift. And I guess the people who believe you should be punished for your crimes would take that away from you in prison, rather than saying, well, maybe by exploring the world, and as you say, with mental health, etc., then maybe you will end up in a better place by the time you leave this place.
Absolutely. Well, I think after the last year where we've all been a bit more locked in, we might have a bit more empathy for people who need that escape through reading, even more so, than any of the rest of us. I wanted to ask you as well about research. We don't have heaps of time left, so do pop your comments on questions for Meredith in the comments section. But and there's some lovely comments going on, so you can enjoy those after.
That's why I keep looking over there. I'm going,
I keep blazing off to the side. But I did want to ask you a bit about your research, because Yarrandarrah is a fictional town and a fictional prison, but you will have investigated beyond just sort of the work of Fine Cell and other things. Where did you draw your inspiration and other parts of your research, not just necessarily about to create the prison itself, but also to kind of, build on the themes that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I think I don't think often you don't think about the book as much until it's out in the world. And I think one of the things I hadn't really put a framework around it was that building Yarrandarrah Prison was actually a world building exercise, which is what we normally talk about when we're talking about science fiction or fantasy writing. But in fact, if for someone who, obviously I'm not a bloke. I am a white middle-aged woman, so so many things about this novel were completely made. It was completely made up. But to get inside that headspace and to make that environment authentic, I read a lot of biographies and memoir, particularly. There was one guy, and I'm sorry I've only got the proof copy of this, but this probably can't read it very well, lobbed into my post, Redeemable by Erwin James. He's a murderer. This is about his path to redemption. And he, in fact, while he was in jail, started writing for The Guardian, and he now works in prison reform. So there was reading things like that. There was reading lots and lots of video as well, like looking inside jails and seeing how they operate, and reading ridiculous quantities of policy documents and correctional services handbooks. And so you've got a family member who's gone to prison sort of handbooks as well, and talking to people who've worked in the system. I would have loved to have gone on a jail tour. The first time I tried to arrange that with my local jail, there had recently been a breakout, so not dissimilar to the one that's in the book. And so they were like, no visitors here, thanks. And the second time I tried to organise it was this close, was through doing a tour of Long Bay Jail. And unfortunately, COVID came and no one's allowed to go through the system again. So it was... that made it a little bit more of a challenge for me to be authentic, but I was really grateful that I had people around me who have worked in the system and do know the system, who could go, that would never happen, or that would happen. In the same way that, when you're writing a character who's a doctor and you need to talk about medical procedures and stuff, you don't actually have to go, be hands-on, as it were, but it's really important to understand
surgery,
the subtleties. I'm much more au fait with stitching, having come from a family, or my mother was a professional sewer, so had some background with that as well. Just reading lots of stuff. I read lots of PhDs as well to get the diet right, and what things are you allowed to have in your cell, and how the prison libraries work, and just stuff, every time you'd have a question, you go, well, what would they be having for breakfast? And I'm a bit, anyone who reads my writing knows I'm a bit of a foodie, so I still had a bit of fun with the food, even though the food was pretty shocking.
Yes.
Hummus with gherkins. What are they thinking? Who's going to want to eat hummus with gherkins?
No, that's just...
it's just wrong.
I can't go for a gherkin at the best of times, but don't ruin my hummus with a gherkin. No. And I have a process question I wanted to ask you, actually, because there's so many interesting themes and sort of great stuff to chat about in the book. But when you're writing, are you writing thinking about the themes, or are you really just focused on the characters and the themes just kind of come in because they've been bubbling away in your subconscious. You're thinking about things to do with justice or connection or mental health or all the various different addiction and stuff like that, and it's not at the forefront? Or are you thinking, I want to get this in, or it's really just Derek or Joey or Debbie who's
I think
leading?
when I start writing, it's definitely all about plot and character. Like I'm really getting the feel of, I'm getting the voice, because I write in deep third person mostly. Then I really like to get the voice right, and also I come from an acting background in terms of don't get not like acting. I did drama at school and at uni. I think anyone who's read my website knows that my acting highlight of my career was the Year 12 play. I was Darcy in Pride and Prejudice because it was an all-girls school.
Oh, well, that's great.
That's it.
I was Lady Catherine de Bourgh at my school.
There you go. Yes, but I think the drama background really makes you think about your setting, your stage, and how the characters are interacting in that space. So that's definitely where it has to come from for me whenever I start a novel. Then I think once you're into the second and third, definitely the second and third drafts, you're really starting to think about the themes that have floated to the surface. And as we all know, that all the writing is in the editing, so you then will see that through, so it flows. So for the reader, it's kind of seamless, whereas you might have only had that brilliant idea in the second last page of the novel, and you then have to go back and see it all through. So yeah, it's a bit of both, but definitely first draft for me is very stream of consciousness almost. It's very much like just spit it all out, and then particularly with this novel, it was a lot of rewriting to get it to the product, as it were, that it is today.
Well, I do actually think that the writing and stitching together, there's a similarity there. You're kind of you're working it all out in the broad brushstrokes, and then it's that fine embroidery that goes through, at the end to really kind of make it beautiful and get the details in and make it really kind of shine. Now I've realized that we have gone on for half an hour, and I should probably start wrapping up in a bit, but I did want to say also I haven't actually held up a copy of this beautiful book with a hand-stitched front cover as well, I should say, of beautiful authenticity. There are reading group questions in the back of the book, because I feel like we've really only scratched the surface of the stuff that there is to talk about with this book. I think that it's such a thought-provoking, heartwarming, poignant, kind of almost and scary at times, and moving and funny. It's kind of got, much like Prison, I think it's got a whole kind of microcosm of life packed in there. So I do want to tell everyone that it's really great for book clubs and really great for chatting, and we've got that in there for everyone. And I want to say thank you, Meredith, so much for sitting and chatting to me today. I mean, I could go on all afternoon, but I should probably let you go.
Yes,
but it was
thank you for having me,
and
and and so lovely to be in this forum and be able to talk to a really broad audience as well, which is really lovely as well. So thank you.
That's so nice. Oh, someone's just chimed in saying hummus with gherkins is amazing. I think that's deeply disturbing.
Well, Victoria, the author. I know Victoria. Yes, well, maybe she's just making that up.
I really hope so, Victoria, because we're going to have a chat about that at some point. How upsetting. Oh, but it's absolutely brilliant to have a chat. It's out now, everybody, at your libraries. As we've discussed, libraries matter. All good bookshops, online. I hope you all enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed working on it. And audio, of course, absolutely, and ebook, and any way you'd like to consume your books. But we've had such a joyous time working on the book together. It's been really, really wonderful, and I'm absolutely sure that all the readers are going to enjoy it as much as we have. So I look forward to go and post a review on Goodreads so we can hear what you thought about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.